Oh, hello. My name is Fernanda. I am one of the moderators at Brout. And today I'm here to introduce Thiago Veigga. He's going to make a presentation for you guys. This is about gender in ELT, providing safe spaces. So everyone, this is Thiago. He's a teacher trainer, and materials designer based in Rio. He holds a postgraduate degree in media education at PUC-Rio, and has worked in the ELT industry for over 14 years. So enjoy.
Thank you. So I'm getting closer because it's so much fun to have Fernanda here with me. And thank you everyone for coming this afternoon. Today I'm going to talk about gender. So let me start by sharing my screen here with you. Okay. All right. This talk is about providing safe spaces to people who are not part of the binary, male, female. I'm not sure if this is working. I think you can see. Yes, yes. I need to keep it. Sorry, minor technical problems. Yeah, I'll keep it like that. So let me start with some terms that I think are useful for us to have very clear. So we have here cisgender, transgender, non-binary, gay, lesbian, pansexual, assigned at birth, and intersex. So I would like to ask the people who are watching to go to the comments and tell me what you think those terms are about, and yeah, come up with some definitions. Okay. Cisgender is someone who is not transgender. That's right. Okay, non-binary is someone who doesn't identify as male or female. Sometimes a person identifies as both. Okay, gay and lesbian are known by everyone. Pansexual. It's very interesting because here in Brazil, this is a funny story. I mean, it's not that funny actually. There is a singer called Sergey, and he used to say in the 90s that he was pansexual and that he was attracted and he would have sexual intercourse with trees. So no, being pansexual is not about having sexual intercourse with objects or things like that. It is about when you're attracted to people regardless of their gender. So that's what pansexual is. Okay, and then we have assigned at birth. Any guesses? Okay, this seems to be new to some of the people here in the chat. Okay. Yeah. Cisgender, being comfortable with the gender you've been assigned. Yeah, that's right, Danielle. So when we're born, based on our genitalia, basically what the doctors do is they open our legs and they see a penis, and they will see they see a penis and they say male, and they see a vagina and they will say female, right? But about intersex? Intersex used to be called hermaphrodite, but that's considered a very offensive term these days. So but it's when there is ambiguity in terms of person's genitalia. So that's more of a term that is more related to biology. All right, so just very quickly to see if those concepts are clear, let's check. So I have here some situations that I'm going to read for you. First, we have Alyssa. Alyssa was assigned female at birth, lesbian, and she identifies as a transgender woman. What I want to ask you is if you think this is a possible situation. Someone is assigned at birth, this person identifies as a lesbian, and this person also identifies as a transgender woman. And tell me why or why not you think this is possible. Possible, possible. Okay. Well, actually, that would not be possible, because when you are assigned female at birth, and if you identify with a woman, if you identify as a woman, you couldn't be a transgender woman, you would be a cisgender woman. Danielle was right, she can't be a transgender woman if she was assigned female at birth. So no, the first situation would not be possible in terms of, it would be a contradiction of terms. And then we have Roxy. Roxy was assigned male at birth, identifies as a lesbian, and is a transgender woman. Do you think this is possible? Would this be a possible scenario? Yes, no, why not? Mm-hmm. Okay, that, yeah, okay. Yes, Roxy's situation would be possible because she was assigned female at birth. Her gender identity is a woman, so she's a transgender woman, and her sexuality would be lesbian. As Danielle said here in the comments, gender is who you identify as, and sexuality is who you're attracted to. And that's right. And that is a very common misconception. Many people associate gender identity with sexuality, and that's a big mistake. Those are two different and independent things, really. And then we have the third situation, Ariel's. Ariel was assigned female at birth. Ariel identifies as pansexual, and Ariel is non-binary. Is that a possible scenario? Why not? Yes, no. I don't think so. Well, in fact, yeah, that is possible. This person, they were assigned at birth, Ariel, and this person does not identify as a woman, so this person is non-binary. So this person may feel neither, or they may feel both, but certainly not female. So yes. And Danielle said something here about someone assigned male at birth can be non-binary and attracted to others. Yeah, that's right. So there are many possibilities, many ways of being a man, many ways of being a woman, and especially nowadays here in Brazil, there's been a very conservative wave recently. So teachers sometimes wonder if they should talk about these things and what are going to be the consequences, both in terms of their jobs, and we need to consider employers and everything else. So let's start why I think maybe we should not talk about gender, at least some of the possible arguments. The three that come to my mind are religious reasons, because some religions think that you are born something and you're born a gender based on your genitalia, and that should not be up for debate. So religion is a reason to not talk about gender. It is a controversial topic, so people might feel offended, maybe because of religious reasons, maybe because they're just more conservative, and for commercial reasons. Unfortunately, here in Brazil, unlike other places, education is not a right. Education is a privilege, and especially foreign language education. So there is a commercial side of things that we cannot ignore. And so that's a reason why maybe we should not talk about gender in class with their students. But I think there are other reasons why we should talk about gender. The talking about gender is a very important part. Gender is a very important part of someone's identity. And if you, like me and like many schools and universities, if you follow this EFR, the Common European Framework of References for Languages, you know, or maybe you're not familiar, but this document mentions the importance of the self, and it's one of its objectives. One of the objectives of this EFR is to develop a learner's sense of identity, and that also has to do with meaningful interactions. So Bernard Warnick from 2005, they argue that a learner's sense of gender roles, societal positions, class backgrounds, and ethnic histories, these things are very important when we talk about identity, when we want to develop the person's sense of identity. I have a comment here. Gender for sociology is not the same for biology. Yes, definitely not. It's definitely not the same. And when we talk about biology, we usually don't talk about gender either. We talk about sex. So there is a difference between biological sex and gender. And I think there are some other reasons why I think we should talk about gender. Well, here we have some of these reasons. Here we have on the left, we have Dandara Santos from Ceará. You might, if you're from Brazil, you might remember her. She was beaten, tortured, shot, bashed on the head with a brick, and that case got extremely famous. There was a lot of publicity because it was filmed. The people who killed her, they filmed with their cell phones. So there is a very disturbing video, if you Google her name, that shows her sitting on the ground covered in dust and blood and being kicked in the face, bitten with a plank of wood, and then forced into a wheelbarrow. And then the police believe that she was taken to a nearby street, shot in the face, and bludgeoned. So I think Dandara is one of the reasons why we should talk about this. There is also the case from Mirella de Castro, who was a transgender woman from Belo Horizonte. She was 39 years old, and she was a sex worker, and she was killed by a client because he didn't want people to know he had sex with the transgender woman. We also have Makele Castro's case from Piauí, and she was asphyxiated and found half naked in Distrito Industrial Teresina. And we also have a case from the USA, Ellie Steinfeld, who who was a 17-year-old trans woman. She was stabbed multiple times, and so the killer, who was her girlfriend actually, stabbed her multiple times, and it was really a terrible death, and stabbed her genitals and her eyes, and it was really shocking. So I think these are some of the reasons why we should talk about gender, because we want people to live. We don't want people to die, and we don't want them to have horrible deaths like these women here. I just included women in this presentation, but trans men and non-binary people are also unfortunately victims of attacks. And another reason why we should talk about gender, especially here in Brazil. Here there is this graph from Grupo Gay da Bahia, which is an NGO that talks about that studies and protects the LGBTQIA population. And as you can see, we had in 2016, last year, 343 deaths here in Brazil. And when we look at those deaths, and those numbers correspond to not only to the transgender population, but to LGBT people in general. 42% of these people were trans people, 3% were lesbians, 50% were gay, 1% was bisexual, and 4% was what people refer to as T-lovers, which are usually men who have sexual intercourse with usually, but not exclusively, to transgender women. Another reason why we should talk about gender, and I'm sorry because this is in Portuguese, but I'm going to translate it for people who don't speak the language. It says that Brazil is the country that looks for the term transsexual on RedTube, and it's the country that where transgender people are killed the most in the streets. So there is a very hypocrite and weird thing going on. At the same time that we are downloading and watching transgender porn, we're also killing those people. So there is maybe a love and hate relationship there going on, something that is not really understood. So I personally find that really weird. And why we should also talk about gender, and especially those transgender and non-conforming and gender non-conforming populations. There was a national transgender discrimination survey, and that showed that the American national rate of suicide was 44.6%, while the rate for transgender people was 41%. So transgender people commit suicide much more often than your average cisgender person. And that data is also corroborated by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Unfortunately, could not find any specifics about Brazil, but I suspect it's not really different. And so we understand that transgender people, they are part of a very particular vulnerable group, really a really vulnerable population. And when we talk about vulnerable populations, what are we really talking about here? We're talking about people who are going to be more exposed to illnesses, to premature death, to diminished quality of life. The life expectancy for a transgender person in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, is 34 years old or 31. And as you may guess, it's particularly worse for transgender women of color. So when we think of vulnerable populations, we also think of people who identify with cultural and whose identities and cultural and ethnic backgrounds and face difficulties because of those, and their personal characteristics and life circumstances, they also play a major role in making them feel vulnerable. And something you might be wondering is that, okay, I understand what you're talking about, and it's really sad, it's really awful, but I don't have any transgender students, I don't have any gender non-conforming students, I don't have a non-binary student. So why should I be concerned about bringing these issues to the classroom? Well, the thing is, you cannot tell. You cannot necessarily tell just by looking at the person that they are transgender or not, that they are non-binary or not. First, because some people have already transitioned, and you literally can't tell that the person has had a previous life, or has identified, or people have assigned them a different gender. You can't really tell. So some other people, they might be still in the closet, and some of those people who are still in the closet, they might be your students. And even if you don't have students who are transgender and gender non-conforming, they might know someone who is. And I think it's very important for us to prepare students for the world. And isn't this what we do when we teach them a foreign language? Especially, again, I repeat here, in Brazil, where language education is a privilege, it's not a right. So shouldn't we equip our learners with the tools to be better people, or at least to be more equipped to deal with the differences? So I think those are solid points why we should talk about gender. And then some of you might be asking yourselves, and probably asking me, okay, how do I do that? Because it's certainly not easy. And how do I bring transgender people or gender to my classroom? So I'm going to give you some practical tips. And my first tip would be to include transgender people. Include them in your classroom, and make them part of the world, because they are part of the world already. These people have been erased from history, but they've always been there. Being transgender is nothing new. It didn't start last year or in the past 5 years. So they've always been there, and we have ignored them so far. So my first tip would be for you to include them. Another piece of advice that I have would be for you to have, as teachers, a zero tolerance policy to transphobia. And that includes, if someone makes a transphobic comment in your classroom, be the person that's going to say, I think what you said is going to be perceived as transphobic. You should not say that. And then some of you might be thinking and wondering, Okay, but I don't really feel comfortable doing that. I'm really not sure. How can I tell? And I have a very simple technique to help you with that. Um, just imagine if the person was making the same comment about a Black person. So if you can transfer that that comment, that student's comment, or maybe that colleague's comment to 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 the scenario of a Black person, maybe if you find that comment racist, that comment is probably going to be transphobic. And why am I talking about racism and race and color and Black people? Do I think these things are equivalent, are the same? No, not at all. I think they're very different things. But in terms of the discussion, I feel we are much more advanced when when we compare transgender people's rights and Black and people of color rights. We also should use inclusive language as much as possible. And then you can watch AJ's talk, which if you haven't, it's going to be recorded. The recorder is already here. So instead of simple changes, instead of addressing your students as guys, maybe you should use words such as everyone, such as folks. Instead of waiter or waitress, maybe you could use the word server. And instead of sometimes assuming the person's gender and referring to them as he or she, maybe you could use they. These are simple changes, and I'm sure they would have a tremendous impact on someone who doesn't feel part of this binary social construct, or at least someone who doesn't feel they were assigned the gender they should have been. In terms of practical tips, when we talk about course books, it's usually hard for most course books. In 1999, so not a lot has changed, Thornbury talked about the lack of diversity that we have in course books and how gay and lesbian people are totally ignored. And Wim van Lucre also talked about that in 1999, not specifically about gay, lesbian, and LGBT people, but how course books ignore feelings that are understood as negative as well as ideological statements. And when we talk about ideological statements, what are we really talking about? Everything is ideological. Every statement has an ideology. So these people have been talking about this for a long time, and I'm afraid not a lot has changed. So sometimes you have a course book and you have to work with that at the school you work at, or simply because that course book is good. And we understand that sometimes materials are not perfect, and that's okay. No material is going to be perfect to be able to cater to all students. So for instance, here I have a snapshot from a course book that we all know and like, has been around for a long time. And then you have a very traditional family tree. You have the grandparents, and then the parents, and uncle and aunt, and the nephew, niece, grandchildren. So maybe instead of using those standard family trees, maybe you could talk and use some real life examples. For instance, here, everyone knows who they are. Everyone knows this family, whether you like them or not. They are really popular, and they happen to be a pretty, I would say, non-traditional, not standard family. You have the children. You have some of them are married, some are not. There is someone who's a single mother. The there is a mother who's a cisgender, there is another parent who is transgender. So as much as I find Caitlyn Jenner a very controversial person, maybe her family would be a good example for you to start talking about gender in class. And as Scott said earlier on, maybe not making the class about that, not coming and saying, okay, so let's talk about being transgender today. Today we're going to learn about being transgender. No, that's not what I'm advocating for, what I advocate for. But showing people, showing that they exist. So when you talk about, for instance, celebrities, maybe in the context of clothes or physical characteristics, instead of using the usual straight celebrities, you could talk and mention some other people. For instance, you could use a transgender man like Chaz Bono, Cher's son, and especially because when we talk about gender, we rarely includes transgender men. So I think it's important to make them part of this conversation. You could include Laverne Cox, very famous actress, successful, from Orange is the New Black, very successful TV show. When again, when we talk about models, for whatever reason, maybe instead talking about Gisele Bündchen, which is usually the first name that comes to Brazilian teachers' mind because, well, she's Brazilian. Maybe you could talk about Valentina, who also happens to be Brazilian, but is a transgender woman. And both have been on the cover of Vogue, for instance. So do you have any questions? I tried to make it fast. We would have time for questions. But I'm afraid we don't have that much time, but...
Yeah, let's see if we have questions. Just a second. Anyone got questions? There has been a lot of discussion here, but I don't think. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Sergio asks, "Have you ever had a student come out as transgender?"
No, I have not.
Neither have I.
Yeah. Especially for people who are watching this and they come from other countries. Here in Brazil, it's very difficult for transgender people to have access to education. And they're usually, when they come out, they're usually kicked out of the house, and then they're forced into sex work. And as I said, their life expectancy is around 30 years old. So it is, I'm a very privileged teacher in that sense, and probably many of you who are watching this too. So usually we deal with very privileged students, and transgender people are usually not privileged because even if they are from a wealthier background, they are often, when they come out, they're often denied basic human rights. Any other questions?
Let's see. No, I don't think we have some questions. Any other questions, Thiago?
Okay, so let's wrap up. So here there are some references. I know it's probably a little too small for you to read, but if you have any questions, you may just ask me afterwards.
Yeah. So if you guys want to get the certificate, can you say the link, please, Thiago? You memorized it. I haven't.
Yes, the link is bit.ly/let me see here, /Braille Queer Day 2017 certificate. So that is our link. And that's it. If you don't have any other questions, we're going to have other things coming up. At 3:40, we're going to have 2 concurrent sessions, one with Gabriela Frois about detabooing sexuality, and the other from Sergio Viola about introducing LGBT issues in the classroom.
Yeah. That's it. So thank you very much, Thiago. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Very informative. So see you around.
See you.